Welcome back to another episode of the HIP podcast. My name is James Layton, CEO and founder of Anderson James. This is the podcast where I bring you real-life stories from some of the most inspirational leaders of our sector. Today, I was delighted to be joined by Nigel Wilson, Group Chief Executive of Gentoo. We talk at length around Nigel's journey through housing, the decarbonisation agenda that Gentoo have, partnership working, fire, building safety, and also talk about Gentoo's development team winning Development Team of the Year at the Inside Housing Awards. If you like this podcast, I'd ask that you like and subscribe and share with as many people as you can. Enjoy the show. Nigel, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks.
How are you?
Thanks a lot, James. I'm good, thanks. Yeah. It's good to be on a calm weather day in the northeast. We've had, I think, 6 or 7 storms since Storm Owen in November. It feels like we've been battered, and certainly our roofs, walls, and fences have massively. So It's nice to have a calm day.
Yeah, it is. It's nice here as well. I'm in Manchester, but it's blue skies, so it's a good day. I obviously know you, but just in terms of for the listeners, could you just do us a bit of an overview of yourself and just a bit of an introduction, really?
Sure. Group Chief Exec at Gentoo. Gentoo is the Sunderland housing stock transfer, 20 years old now, or 21 years old now this year. It was 38,000 homes transferred across, one of the earliest large-scale voluntary transfers. We're at about 29,000 homes now, just in Sunderland, in the city. So, we work in all the 5 key neighbourhoods around the city. Gentoo has been through, shall we say, a troubled history in terms of some of the regulatory issues and challenges. I joined the group 3 years ago alongside a newish board to help modernise and get the organisation back to G1 status, which we achieved. And we continue to work hard to do that. I've been involved in the social housing sector since 1985 when I joined a housing co-op when I left my home in Lancashire to go and live in Birmingham, and I've worked across the Midlands in Stoke, and prior to coming to Sunderland, I was working in Wythenshawe in South Manchester for 12 and a half years before that, for Wythenshawe Community Homes and Parkway Green before that. So, I'm, cut me in half, and it's social housing. That's all I've really known, and I'm passionate about it, and I care deeply that we provide best services we can for our tenants and residents. And for me, community organisations, however large or small, are absolutely essential. So that's why I loved working in Wythenshawe, because it was one significant neighbourhood, key part of Manchester. And similarly with Gentoo, we're Sunderland. I don't need to worry about 40 or 50 different local authorities. I've just got relationships with the one key one.
Yeah. What's been the key differences? I mean, as you said, you've been in housing for a long time. What's been the differences from the northeast to the northwest? Have you seen much in terms of difference of stock or difference of tenant and resident?
Less traffic. Having got used to sitting on the M6 in traffic jams for most of my life, on the M56. It's so nice to be in what is really big sky country in the northeast. It's a beautiful part of the world. Not saying that the northwest wasn't. That's where I was born and brought up, and I love it dearly. But I think, folk have got different accents, but their challenges and their ambitions are very similar. I think, from Wythenshawe to Sunderland, it's not hugely dissimilar in terms of the age and the profile of a lot of the stock, and these are working class places. These are places that saw through the 80s the deindustrialisation and the poverty and challenges that came with that. Sunderland Council now are bringing massive new investment into the city, significant, I think, regrowth and refocus in terms of that. And I think the city is very much one that's on the up, as Manchester did many years ago. I was fortunate enough to work in Wythenshawe as we began the reinvestment in the homes and saw the tram come into the airport and the difference that made, and the growth of industry around the airport and the jobs that created. And I think similarly here in Sunderland, with the investment that's coming in now and the Riverside development, it's behind where Manchester was. Manchester has took the lead on many things for a long time under Sir Richard and Sir Howard, and I think that's continuing now under Bev. But I think Sunderland's got that same opportunities, and it's a big potential.
Yeah, it's a lot more close knit, the northeast market. I've noticed, there's not as many providers, there's not as many contractors. It's a bit more of a small knit community, isn't it, of people?
It is. It's much smaller. When you worked in Greater Manchester, and you just have, and we obviously have the Greater Manchester Housing Partnership, which we were part of. That was one of the biggest differences when I went to a meeting here to meet the other chief execs. There's a lot less of us. They've gone through a lot of mergers and bringing organisations together like Carbon and 13. So it is a smaller, tighter market. It does mean when you're recruiting, you've got less of a pool of people to pull from. Yeah. And also, I think the other thing is it's harder to get people to come up here to relocate and things like that, just because it is so different. And so, those are challenges of retaining good people, developing skills and bringing new people around. Certainly when I worked in the Midlands and the Northwest, you were quite used to people moving around the housing organisations quite frequently. You get less of that here. People are a bit more stay, shall we say.
Yeah, fair. And just for a helicopter view, just give us an helicopter view of Gentoo as a group of businesses now, because I know there's plenty of parts to it. Just give us a helicopter overview.
I think, well, we've managed to, over the years, get rid of. I think at one point there were 13 different subsidiaries, which were bonkers, to be perfectly frank. And it was fair to say not many of them made any money, which is another, challenge for the group. So at the moment, we are very much. We've got Gentoo Homes as a subsidiary, which is a house builder, 5-star house builder, fantastic developer, developing up to around 200 new homes for sale a year, delivering a great product, really good sales profile. But again, challenges there are as a small builder in a market that's now heated up significantly. Buying new land is very much a challenge, as lots of people are now in the market trying to do that, and we're seeing prices escalate. But doing a good job. The core group is looking after the 29,000 homes. We've got a large direct labour force in terms of that property services, delivering those in-house. And then we brought in I brought in an affordable development team just over 2 years ago. Joanne Gordon leading that, and they've done really well in terms of getting us we'll not be a big developer because of the pressures we've got in terms of investing in our existing stock, but we're looking at doing 1,200 homes over the next 5 years, and that program's well underway. Developed a range of our own new house types, which we're just seeing the first ones let over the next couple of weeks, and they're fantastic. Went out to look at them last week. Great space designs, A-rated, heat pumps, electrical charging points. We've invested in those to a standard, means that we don't have to go back in and spend money on them again in 5 or 10 years. They're fit for purpose and will provide a really energy efficient home with battery storage and stuff, photovoltaics on the roofs. So people, especially in the current energy market, will be in a really good position in terms of those homes.
Amazing. I've got so many questions to ask you, but I'll try and break it into some sections. So I wanted to start with decarbonisation, because I saw recently that you'd had a successful bid with the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund. Tell us a little bit about that and what that means to Gentoo.
Fundamentally, it's the key thing is, as you know, these are partnership bids with the local authority. Yeah. One of the key challenges for me when I started was to ensure that relationship with the local authority is strong and progressive, and we've really built on that. And this is another demonstration of that, working together to do this and make a difference and help the city council deliver their ambitions for decarb. It will mean that these are very, I would say, not fancy. This isn't about a demonstrator. We were part of the original demonstrator programme. We had to give that back because we couldn't deliver on what was happening. We were trying to do some infrared stuff, and then as the rules changed, the cost of that just got disproportionate. I think it ended up at about 75 grand a unit. Well, the units in Washington we were going to be working on couldn't deliver that value out of it, and we were going to have to dig the floors up and the drives and stuff to get down, and just it wasn't deliverable. This is much more practical around windows, around insulation, about wrapping, and all those things that we know a program's ready to hit the ground and run, and that just means we can accelerate some of that work in the city.
Yeah, and in terms of Sunderland, I know you did a partnership bid. What will the impact to be to the stock, and what will the impact be to the
the council, I suppose, and the city?
I think the city have set ambitious targets for what it wants to do in terms of its stock. And I think, like every local authority, the challenge is what you do around the stuff that isn't social housing or your own as a local authority. It's the private sector stuff. So the more work we can do and other housing providers in the city, it just helps the city get nearer its ambitions and targets for that. I think for us, those additional 600 and odd properties that are going to benefit from it just means that helps us accelerate our programme and means we can stretch our funding further. And I think, every housing provider are facing challenges in terms of how we divvy up the pot. We had a board meeting this week to talk through our budget and new business plan. And, we all have to be honest. It is difficult to stretch fire safety, decarbonisation, new build, existing reinvestment. And part of challenge for Gentoo particularly is because previous regimes here had not prioritised things like double glazing and doing some of that, some of those property improvements. We're still playing catch up from the original transfer, which means that we're further behind the ball than other people, which means that's a bigger pull on our resources. So it is a fine balancing act, and I think we all recognise that we've got to prioritise our existing homes, but equally, we're still losing homes under the right to buy, and we've seen a rise in that in the last 6 to 9 months as we're coming out of COVID. And I think you can't afford to be losing the stock without putting it back.
Yeah, and has the pandemic slowed any of that sustainability drive down? And has it caused you any different issues in terms of where you prioritise in terms of them 4 or 5 key bits? Because like you say, everyone I speak to, every chief executive in the housing sector, where do you spend the investment? Is it decarbonisation, fire safety? Everyone's driving for new homes. It's got to give somewhere, hasn't it?
It has. And fundamentally, it's about how our FD did a really good exercise where he looked at, over the 5 years, how do we blend this in a sense? Because ultimately what you don't want to be going in and doing 3 pieces of work. You want to make sure you're making that so if you're doing building safety work, let's get that done. Let's wrap that up with the decarb work that needs to be done. And if we were also looking at taking a whole house approach, if the kitchen or the bathroom or the roofs and other things are going to be done, well, how do we put all those together? Because the other thing is, I think the Northern Housing Consortium did some really good work on the tenants' jury around climate work. And those tenants were saying very loudly and clearly as part of their request that you need to engage and involve us, but also remember it's our home. If you keep coming back and taking bits away and knocking on things or saying we need to do this, it's, none of us would like it. Somebody traipsing in and out of our house every 3 months. So it is about trying to make sure you make that as efficient as possible. And then you've got simple things like we're trying to replace the district heating system in Washington, and the challenges of supplies of boilers are things that are impacting us all. In the same way that if you're improving homes, you can't get these isolator things fitted because of some legislation, that delays stuff as well. So, there's practical things, and some of those have come out of the back of COVID, some of them come out of the back of Brexit, some of them are a blend of everything. And now, obviously, with the conflict in Ukraine and the push on oil prices again, what's going to be the impact of that to our supply chains? And who knows?
Yeah, I agree. How much of the sustainability, decarbonisation stuff is education, would you say? Like, how much education do we need to... I hear all these times about air source heat pumps and all the different technologies that we're going to put into properties, but unfortunately, they've got to be used in the right way to give us those efficiencies. How much education will we need to do with residents on how to use the products, the technologies that are coming forward?
I think it's a massive shift. I think about my mum and dad went from a coal-fired Rayburn back boiler to a gas boiler, and trying to explain to them that they could have the central heating on timer was an ongoing battle for 10 years. Oh, I'm not putting it on, it'd be too hot. Oh, no, it'd be too expensive. I'll just put it on when I'm cold. No, you need to keep the house warm. So you're moving people from an instant heat or a boost. And, we've got people who are looking out over the North Sea. It's bloody windy and bloody cold some days. So you need that boost. And that's hard with ambient heating. So trying to help support people to make that transition, particularly older people, I think is going to be an ongoing challenge, because I think the frustrations we hear, we've done some work with 7 tower blocks in the city centre around ground source heat, and they've got, it's a challenge sometimes because people go, well, I just want to turn it on. You don't need to turn it off. If you turn it off, it takes a long time to get back up to 21 degrees. You need to leave it on, and then your flat will keep warm. But then they're concerned about fuel prices. So it is again, it's a bit like when you fit the sprinklers, everybody thinks they're going to have them big metal things hanging out of the ceiling, and the moment you light a candle, it's going to sprinkle everything with water, you know. So it is about explaining, it is about demonstrating, it's about spending time and making sure people are constantly available to go and help folk understand it and what's going on. The technology isn't straightforward, and it is a shift, you know, so we have to accept that it's not an instant answer necessarily.
Yeah, and it'll evolve, right? So like you say, you put the technology in now, in 3 months, we might find a different technology that's more efficient. So it's going to be a constant battle, I think. You mentioned it, so let's go on to it. But fire, building safety, how's Gentoo been impacted by those elements, and what are you doing around those parts?
Well, we've had significant investment programs. Immediately after Grenfell, I think we got 25 towers, so we had to remove a small amount of cladding, not a huge amount. And then we've degassed all our tower blocks, as I've said. We put in sprinkler systems where we can in terms of that, and that will continue to be a program as we go forward. A massive fire door program. And as you know, there's been challenges in terms of sometimes supply for that. And now we're having to build a system so we can log every fire door and give individual records and servicing, etc., which is another significant cost and investment in terms of it. But it's about people's safety, and you can't compromise on that. And, you know, it's also not just the high rise, but your low rise as well, and these smaller blocks where you've got to make sure everything's up to date and people understand their responsibilities as well. So for us, it's ongoing investment and key part of the work. And as I said, it is about how we blend those investments alongside the investment program and improvement programs, so that we're making as few intrusions as we have to in people's homes. So we're getting all those works phased together as much as possible.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I saw something about a Future Homes Consortium. Is that something that you're part of now? And what is that? Just so I understand.
Yeah. Future Homes Consortium was set up through Homes for the North. Okay. It was about looking at modern methods of construction and how we get a suite of designs that we can be comfortable with, and look at how we can get those delivered. I think, oh God, if I had £1 for every time we've talked about MMC over the last 15 or 20 years, you know, and every time it's, well, we need to be scalable. It needs to be scalable and we'll get costs down. We never seem to get to that golden moment when somebody goes, here's a great product, here it's really affordable, and it gets to site quickly and easily. And we've all, you know, I've lost count of how many pilots we've had, you know, more pilots than Heathrow on MMC, I think. So, you know, we have to decide where it works best and how it works. I think will always be a blended approach. We're never going to stop traditional build, I don't think. But it's about how you get to systems that really do deliver value for money and good product. None of us wants to see 1 million rabbit hutches being built that all look the same. And I'm not saying they do, but there's a challenge about how you build something that's sympathetic with the neighbourhood it's in, that doesn't look odd. But you still want the modern design, you still want the space and light that you get. And I think those will remain some of those challenges. And Future Homes is about how we work collaboratively to do that and take that forward.
And on the MMC thing, I mean, where's your stance at the moment on it? Because I've been tracking this for a number of years. It feels like there's a definite more investment than there was 5 years ago in it. I don't think we've got the concept right yet, but we're moving towards that. Other countries, Australia, Japan, they've really made it work, and I don't know why we can't in the UK. What's the challenge for us getting it in?
I think traditional thinking. You know, if you look at Australia, they've often, it's like in parts, America's still always been very timber led. Yep. You know, I went years ago to Canada, and so sort of factories knocking stuff out there, some of which were at the rough end and some of which at the high value end. And I think it's like you can go to Germany, you can spend a fortune, you get a brilliant factory-made house, but we can't afford to do that. So it is finding that balancing point between really good product, something that can be tailored and doesn't it's not about putting brick slips at the front or a bit of render to give the difference. You want some real design, and also creating the space and light that you need into it as well. So I think there are the different methods. I think you're right. I don't think we've settled on it. I think lots of people get excited about building a factory and then crack on. But and I know Homes England have invested a hell of a lot of money in the likes of Ilke and others. And I think the challenge always is, and the sector does suffer from this occasionally, I want one if he's got one or she's got one, and we want our own. If we just could and I think that's why it's important groups like Future Homes do come together and try and coalesce around this, because, it isn't necessarily the need that we all have to do our own, but there is a bit of that sometimes.
And you've mentioned something. I mean, you're involved in loads and loads of consortiums, and you as a leader have lots of network. How important's your network been over the years? Because it sounds like it's quite important that you can network and speak to other chief execs and get key issues discussed and challenged, so that not everyone's forming their own path. COVID seems to have really, really accelerated that whole helping each other, and the industry feels more than ever for me like back to being one industry, and we're all trying to help each other solve challenges.
I think there's a sense of that. I think people have recognised, always in a time of crisis, folk come together, don't they?
Yeah,
that's the reality is. And I think, COVID has provided a whole host of challenges. And, let's be honest, folk were making it up in the beginning because none of us had been through this. We didn't know what the bloody hell were going on or what we should or shouldn't do, even to the point of, I remember in the early days, it's like, do we still go in to do gas servicing, or have we got an exemption for having to do it? And it was like, oh no, health and safety say you've got to carry on. Well, how the bloody hell do we got? We had people in full like hazmat suits at the beginning because you just didn't know. So, you go through that whole period of discovery, and that is where you need collaboration and picking up the phone to colleagues going, what the bloody hell are you doing? Because or I've heard you doing this. Is it working? How's it going? And I think, I think, I've been in the sector 30 odd years, and through really interesting times in terms of that. But I think the thing that's always stood out is there's always been a spirit of collaboration, competition as well. And I've worked in organisations that are collaborating on one scheme and competing on another with the same people. It's a bit schizophrenic at times, but you just have to keep a sense of humour.
And you just talked about the pandemic. I mean, I don't want to touch on it too much. I feel like we're coming out of the worst of it. What things will you take away from the pandemic that you'll keep, that you implemented while you had to, and what things would you like to see we go back to?
Well, I'm one of the rare people who are a great believer in having folk in office. So same. I think some flexibility, but I like having colleagues around us. I like that interaction, and I know a lot of people are still working a very hybrid model, and I've heard some people who haven't even met colleagues who were recruited 2 years ago. I don't think that's good. I've constantly said I want people in the office working collaboratively together, and yes, some flexibility, but fundamentally, if half our workforce are out on the estates working in our tenants' homes, I want the support colleagues behind them, making sure they're delivering everything they can. And, and the reality is you can't do everything from home. Yeah. And then some people can and some people can't, and you create this sort of counterculture. So for me, I think that understanding, I think what we've certainly seen is a growth with online interaction with tenants and residents, much more than before.
Yeah.
Less reliance on face-to-face meetings for engagement work and stuff. And I think that's something that I want to see us grow and develop further. I think the use of technology has grown. We've all now used to this. I'd never heard of Zoom before.
Same.
I didn't know what it were, so, that is helpful. If it doesn't mean it's getting a train down to London for 3 hours for a 2-hour meeting to get a 3-hour train back, there's sense in that. I don't like it as much because I'd rather sit in a room and have this conversation, because I think you miss out on 20 or 30% of what's going on when you, especially in a group meeting. I think, we did as many of our board meetings face to face as we could, but we had to do some partially by Zoom. And for me, you miss that interaction, even if it's the social bit over a cup of coffee or a chat afterwards. That's how you build relationships for me. And I think that, continues to be something that I think we just have to be honest about.
Yeah, and I've seen people go fully remote, and for me, as soon as we could get people back into the office, we did. Obviously, some need flexibility, and that's fine. But the other thing for me, it's the kitchen chats, the 2-3 minutes here and there, just how are you getting on, how are you finding things?
Yeah. Well, if you're having a crap day, sometimes it's nice to go to somebody else's space and go, can I just tell you how shit my day is? So you can offload it and share it. But you can't book a Zoom meeting to do that for 3 minutes, can you?
I agree. And what about the residents, tenants? I mean, I remember I've worked in housing 15 years, and I remember back in the day, people keep forming an orderly queue outside the offices to get their needs met. I mean, that's the dying art now, surely, and we'll need to still offer that support. But clearly, there's a lot of technology now that can do some of those jobs for us, isn't there?
There is, but fundamentally, there are people who still need to come in and see folk, and we saw that. We kept offices open through appointment, because sometimes people, if they're going through some domestic trauma, or worse, they just need to come in a place of safety and have somebody who can support them through that. And that's hard to do over the telephone necessarily. You need a space to do that. And I think we still see this, people still like that face-to-face. So I think it is a blend always. I don't think you can ever go fully remote. And I think, it is understanding that we need to make sure our services are as tailored as possible to offer that range, and not just channel people one way because it's easier for us.
Yeah, agree. That's fair. And one thing that I noticed when you were down at Wythenshawe is you're a massive into partnerships outside of your organisation. How have you found that settling into the North East? Has it been a different challenge, or has it been quite easy to build and form good relationships with contractors, suppliers, partners? How have you gone around that?
It's a smaller pool, as you said, up here. So I think it is, ultimately it's about putting yourself not out and about, but just making the effort and time to do that. I think, I've always sought to do that. I always believe it's important to be part and parcel. Well, I was lucky in the sense that in Sunderland, the city board was already established, and Gentoo was part of that. So alongside the university, the college, the police, health, the city council, Gentoo was seen as at the heart of those key city discussions, which stood us in really good stead when COVID came, because it meant that work with the voluntary and community sector and with the health and everybody else was absolutely established, so we could build on those foundations. And I think, that was really strong. And I think, the rest, in terms of those collaborations and partnerships, same with our work with the football club. I'd always worked when I was at Wythenshawe with the Man U Foundation. John Shields, who runs that, said you need to go and speak to Leslie at the Sunderland Foundation and the club, and done that. And we've got good partnerships with them now in terms of the work, and those things are important. As with the links to local schools, we support a program called Positive Footprints, which is about working with, I think it's 20 or 30 junior infant schools in the city, helping provide those young people with packages of talking about careers and opportunities before they get to secondary school, which is great program. And that came about because Regender were promoting that program through it's part of the Regender group. And again, I've known Mike Burkett, the chief executive there, for a number of years, and he collared me at conference and said, look, we're running this. Do you think you want to do it in Sunderland? And it is, those opportunities are what make a difference, and it is those connections.
And what other partnerships have been important to you? Because I've seen loads of deals signed recently, partnerships, contractors. What other partnerships are really important to you up in the North East?
Well, I think ultimately when we're spending the amounts of money we're spending, whether we're working with Regen, whether we're working with Tolan, Esh, and Equans, those are all key delivering partners for us, whether it's on the new build or the investment program. So absolutely having good relationships with them, fundamental. Yeah. And then the smaller support contractors working underneath. We've had a brilliant scheme built for us by a small SME builder, Manners. Brilliant work on a really tight site. They've done phenomenally well during COVID to deliver it out, and that'll be getting ready for handover shortly. So it is those, whether it's the big behemoths like Equans and Tolan, or it's the smaller one like Manners, but it's the relationships and the foundations of trust that you build with them which are critical. And honesty. You call them out when they drop a brick, shall we say. But
Yeah, and I think, and as we talk about development, then what's the strategy? What's the plan? I mean, there's loads to talk about here because I suppose a shout out. You already mentioned it, but Joanne Gordon's team winning Development Team of the Year at the Inside Housing Awards. Tell us a little bit about that. I mean, that's a big achievement, isn't it? Really,
it's fantastic recognition. You know, that team was built from scratch. Had to get a program up and running. Develop all the procedures and policies internally, get the support of board and the new development committee, build the relationships with the local planning and the local authority. And Joanne and the team done phenomenally well to do that and get the programme up and running, deliver it through COVID, which nobody could have anticipated. So, you know, seeing them get that recognition at the awards was fantastic because, you know, it's no small feat to go from zero to a program like that. We're not a strategic partner. We're not going to be on the scale of some of our neighbours like 13 and Carbon. We're not in a position of being able to afford to do that. But what we can do is make sure we're delivering really good quality new homes on a scale that's manageable for us, and that make a difference for people in Sunderland who are going to be elected.
Yeah,
and also now we're going to be doing shared ownership, which is a new market, and we're seeing loads of interest in that. And then bringing rent to buyout as well. So, you know, we're not resting on our laurels. We know these are important things to bring forward as well.
And how difficult is it? I mean, I don't know Sunderland particularly well as a place, but it's quite a tight-knit community. How difficult are land and development opportunities in that local area? Because I presume you don't want to go any further afield than Sunderland for development.
No, we've said one of our things about refocusing the business on Sunderland was we're here. This is our manor and this is what we've got to focus on. And we were quite lucky in the sense that when the stock transfer happened, quite a lot of land was encapsulated within the estates, which allowed Joanne's team to go around, literally map all these and decide which are the opportunities. Now, that's meant working with the local authority on the SLAR and things like that to make sure we got our development opportunities coming out on programme with them. But then also working with the local communities, many of whom have seen that bit of land as something that is theirs, that is going to be built on. And, you know, it's not come without some opposition at times. But again, that's down to us to win those debates and arguments, both with local residents, but also local councillors as well. And, you know, we're delivering on the ambitions of the city council and the leadership to provide new affordable homes in the city. So, you know, that's our mantra, and that we're delivering good quality products as well. So Sunderland is a tight-knit area, but it is very much geographical. So you've got Washington, the old Newtown, you've got the colliery communities like Hetton and Horton, and then you've got the city, you know, north of the city and south of the city. So it is very distinct in terms of its profile. And there are areas where people will typically, you know, if you're born and brought up in Hetton, that's where you'll stay typically. It is very much like, it's a bit like Wythenshawe was in my day. You know, it is, you know, these are communities where families grow up and sustain rather than moving away.
And I suppose what's your mandate? What have you said to Joanne that you want? I mean, what's the vision? What's the strategy around the next 3 to 5 years? Have you got that mapped out, or what's the next?
Yeah, we've got our program. We've got our 5-year program mapped out. We've got our sites mapped out. We're working as well with developers in terms of 106 opportunities. So again, Joanne's developing that mixed portfolio. And it is about quality build and making sure we're getting the best value for money. Joanne is a tenacious negotiator. I wouldn't want to be on the other side of the table. And she holds them to account firmly, which is great. And you know, she is a person with a strong professional reputation and a really good knowledge of what is and isn't on. And I think that and a really well-qualified team with good experience stands us in great stead.
Yeah, fair. That's good. And one of the other things, I mean, we talked about challenges before we came online, and one thing we talked a bit about was around how we balance service precision against the cost of living, I suppose, in Sunderland. Yeah. It's a big point for you. How are you trying to find the balance in all of that?
It's hard. I mean, I don't think any of us truly know what the impacts of the inflation, cost of living rises are going to be. Obviously, you know, we've notified our tenants in advance of the rent increase in terms of going with the 4.1. which I think is pretty typical across the sector now, which at the time board were anxious about, but then you see inflation, cost of living increasing, inflation. But the challenges are, if you're on a relatively fixed income, your fuel costs are going up, and some are going up 50% with the drop-off. Your food costs, as any of us who go shopping knows, fuel now, if you run a car, is just going up and up. So I think those challenges, we've done very well during COVID in terms of maintaining our rent collection levels and providing a lot of support to people in terms of benefits. I think the uplifting was important when it came, and obviously that being rolled back has made a challenge. We're increasing our crisis funding for the teams so that we've got more money available to support families when they need it. We obviously link with the community and voluntary sector in terms of that, whether it's sadly food banks or other resources. We've seen a rise in furnished tenancies now for people, so that they can provide those basics in their new homes, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah.
So I think it's one of these where we have to keep a close eye on it. We have to watch the trends very carefully in terms of rent collection, in terms of terminations of people leaving because they can't afford it anymore. What's happening? And then how do we make interventions? And it's difficult because we need to collect the rent to pay for the services. Our costs are going up in the same way. If we don't collect it, we struggle to deliver. So, I think we'll all face some challenges. And I think in areas where there is less income, and Sunderland's got some pockets of quite low income. And it's not, the debate historically has always been, them folk on benefits. This isn't. This is about people who are working, but on low incomes. And if you're on a minimum wage, if you're not on full hours, trying to balance that and universal credit helps, but obviously with the loss of the uplift, I think that was a big setback. So you only have to go in the supermarket and buy a loaf of bread increased massively in the last few months. So those basics are now much harder for folk, and I think that's a challenge. We work with Greg's Bakery on providing breakfast clubs in schools, and those basic essentials, like a hot meal to start the day, are essential for children being able to learn. And, it's a shame in a way we have to do it. It's a bit like the food banks, but at the end of the day, they're providing a vital support service now.
Of course they are, yeah. And there's loads of good work, isn't there? The food banks got really hit, didn't they, in COVID and all the pandemic. And to be honest, we need these services to keep going, don't we? Because I agree with you. I think inflation's outstripping income, and unfortunately, that's going to continue. Definitely. And what do you think? I was reading something the other day around the Decent Home Standard review. What impact do you think that might have? And I'm not even sure when that's meant to be. Is that this year? I think they're looking at doing that.
It's difficult to say until we see the detail. Right. You can't. I think there's been various consultations. I'm not aware of any fixed timelines, but other folk may be. But we'll have to wait and see what we get it. At the end of the day, it's going to mean, we're all at various stages with our reinvestment programs. Those will have to be reappraised subject to what's in here. Yeah. It's a bit odd, isn't it? I remember having this debate with somebody who said, "Is a shower a decent home standard?" Well, it wasn't. But which one of us would want a house without a shower in these days? Yeah,
so true.
So there's got to be some reality to this, and there's got to be some aspiration, but it's also got to be deliverable. So on the back of all the things we talked about previously, it is about how we stack this up, and it's not going to be easy.
Is this the most difficult period you've seen in housing from a financial need perspective? Because there's a lot to do.
I think it's probably. I think if you hadn't got decarb sat on top of building safety and fire safety, then you'd probably be a bit more trying to get to EPCC, and the costs of that are significant for many organisations, depending on your stock profile, etc. If you've got a lot of high rise, then we know how much particularly some London organisations are struggling with in terms of the absolute massive cost of that. So it does depend on your stock profile, but I think this is certainly the most calls I've seen on the resources in my time, and trying to stretch that pound as far as you can by driving efficiencies and effectiveness internally, there's only so far you can go before it impacts on some aspect of it. Yeah. And you can't drop your standards because, we've seen what happens. ITV has been flush with bad stories about mishaps in organisations. And, so you can't let go of the day-to-day. You've got to keep the investment there. But equally, there's the housing lists are not going down. Yeah, there isn't a fall off in need.
And do you think we'll see more mergers and acquisitions? Because I had Ian from Peabody on, and they're going to merge with Catalyst because they need the economy of scale to deliver some of this stuff. Do you think we'll see more of that in the sector in the near future?
Potentially. I think the challenge, and I would say this, wouldn't I? I think the challenge is them actually massively demonstrating the value that they are going to drive out the mergers. I think some have historically. I think some haven't. I think some have been driven by other motives, let's put it politely. And I think, it is essential for the tenants that if their homes are being put together with another organisation, that you're going to get a guaranteed delivery of services and you're going to see those efficiencies being delivered in terms of your investment. And I think if that's happening, fine. But it should be a prerequisite, I think. I think the regulator's got to make sure that that's driven out of it. And I do, we've heard that, I think there's been various times during the past when people have said, oh, that's it now. We're going to have 10 housing organisations in the country. Everybody's going to get merged. Never really happens. But what we've seen is, organisations get into difficulties and have to be assisted by others. But I do, I'm a member of Place Shapers. I've been for a number of years. I do believe the linkage to the community is essential. It doesn't matter whether you're 500 or 50,000, but you need to make sure you've got roots in those communities and you're delivering a place-based approach, because I think that's essential.
Yeah. No, it's definitely agree. And as we look to the future then, I mean, for you personally, you've achieved a lot in your career. What would you still love to achieve in the next 5 or 10 years? What's the next thing you'd love to see in the next 5 or 10 years?
For me, it's just helping continue the modernisation journey for Gentoo, making sure that we can do the things that we need to do and get us on a stronger footing as possible. We're still paying the price of the legacy.
Of course.
So if I can be part of helping steer this through the next 5-10 years, where we've got real good strength in our financial position that allows us to do the work we need to do in Sunderland, I'll be happy.
Yeah, and a couple of last ones, and mainly because of how tight-knit Sunderland is. What's your view on us attracting the next generation into the sector? Something that I'm passionate about, but clearly we need more skills, we need more talent. The skill mix has changed for me in the last 5 years. I mean, decarbonisation being one of those things. I think we're an attractive sector now more than ever.
Oh, I think, I've always believed this. I think, historically folk fell into housing rather than choosing it. I think that's less and less the case these days. I think particularly with the sort of qualifications and skills that people need to bring to the table, whether it's fire safety, building safety, decarbonisation. I think, we were having a debate the other day. We're going to be putting out some graduate recruitment placements. Again, loads of people have done this for a long time, but that's the way you bring the talent in. You nurture it, grow it, and then it needs to get out and about and develop itself. And I think that's what we've got to do. We've got to bring in, I think Kickstart's been a great program of giving people opportunities. I'm a strong believer in apprenticeships right across businesses, not just in the trades, but in the back office support areas as well. And I think in a place like Sunderland, it's having that broad brush. When I first started, we advertised some apprenticeships. I think we had over 1,000 applications for something like 15, 16 posts or something. It was phenomenal. So you want that level of interest. But you also go, well, what happens to all those other people who are not getting in? And I think, that's what we've got to keep trying to challenge.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I suppose just the final point before we wrap up, the future of housing. I mean, we've talked about the challenges that it's going to have. Where are the opportunities? And if you could change one thing about the sector, what thing would you change? If you had government power, what would you change in the sector right now?
Simply, I'd put the money into raising the grant levels and take the pressure off the rents. That's the most fundamental thing you can do. The flip around would make a big difference in terms of lowering rents, take the pressure off those, put the money into the bricks and mortar, allow more homes to be built. get more people engaged in the delivery of that. That for me would be a big thing. And I think there's and if I think we've got opportunities. I think Gove, the Levelling Up white paper, the social housing white paper that's coming, we've got to demonstrate that we're close to our communities and our tenants and residents, that we're good at partnerships. But fundamentally, this government wants delivery. We are people who deliver day in, day out, regardless of, we're counter-cyclical to the economic upturns and downturns. We just get on with it. And I think the ability of government to use that channel to provide those opportunities is there. We just got to keep banging on the door and showing them that we can do it. We're not going to go out with a begging bowl constantly saying, give us more money, give us more money. What we've got to show is, give us the resources and we'll show you what we can do. We're already doing it. We can do more of this if you want it. And I think that's the opportunity to the politicians.
Amazing. What a way to finish. I mean, we'll leave it there. I really, really appreciate your time to talk to us. I'm sure people are going to get loads and loads of value out of that conversation. And hopefully we'll catch up in the future and see how you got on with all these things.
No worries. Good
Cheers,
to talk,
Nigel.
mate. Thank you.
See you later, mate.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.